some paint and doodle floral inspiration for you today, and I also have a little gratitude freebie to grab too, so stick around until later in the video and I'll tell you more about it. But let's get going on today's project. When I started this one, I really had no plan for it, and I started it at the end of a big painting session, and as a way of just using up some leftover paint. You know, I do that quite often. I just try to use it all up. And I thought that a few curved leaf-like shapes would be a great way to start this piece, and also really fitting with my floral theme this month. And then it would just leave me with plenty of creative space for developing it on later. So yeah, I had no real plans for this. I mean, it could have gone either way, as a floral or as an abstract, or maybe something completely different. The first marks that I made were with ballpoint pen, and I've been using ballpoint pen quite a lot recently. I've been using it to break pages, or sometimes when I come to a piece and there's already something on there, I might use a ballpoint pen to sort of break that up a little bit. I don't know, I think it's fast becoming almost like my go-to comfort zone for just getting cracking into a piece. And I really like the mark making that you can do with ballpoint pens, plus the fact you can layer over the top of them without, much difficulty. They add a really lovely texture. So yeah, I feel like they sort of ease me in and get me going when I need to on a layer or on a fresh piece of paper or even on a canvas. And I don't know where these sweeping curves are coming from, but again, it's another pattern that I seem to be repeating quite a lot at the moment. I don't know, I just seem to be going through a phase. So when I came back to this, a day or so later, I can't exactly remember when, but I think it was only a couple of days that it rested. I wasn't really planning for it to go anywhere other than a bit of colourful doodling. But very much with that floral focus sort of ringing in my head at the moment, I did decide that I would try for a stylised bouquet. And how I was going to add the flowers, that just came to me as I started, and I quite like these circles of colour that's going down. I think it was just another way of breaking in and getting working and just doing. Now this was also some leftover paint, so I don't know, that fits quite well with this piece as it's, started with that leftover paint. But it does mean that I didn't actually pick these colours for this piece directly, but I'm just using up some colours that were already on my palette. And that two-tone thing that's going on in those circles, that was just a bit of an accidental addition to this, and a way of just adding in a bit of visual interest and changing up how those circles look. And I really like how they're working out. I think it might be another way of doing this and another thing to revisit from time to time. Now I just keep covering this piece with circle shapes with no real idea of the flower shapes that I eventually want to go on here. But it's okay because circles can work for quite a range of different shapes, can't it? So I'm still keeping my options open. And I think the only thing I was really concerned about here was trying to get the balance of colours nice so that the flowers were varied, and also tried to add in some different sizes here and there for that same reason, just to keep it varied, not have things clustered together that were too similar. So I didn't plan the overall composition, well, not when I started doing it. That did kind of grow, and it was only sort of later as I got more and more of these circles down that I did start thinking about the overall composition of the bouquet itself. So then I started, once that sort of composition, the feeling and thought started to pop into my head, I was being more conscious about where I was adding the circles and what size the circles were as well, and just trying to keep the balance of the bouquet looking good. Then I decided that the piece needed some contrast, and that foliage would just make the perfect kind of contrast for this, especially against the warm colours that I've been using. And a way of sort of lifting them from that textured, that first layer, the textures, because those colours were very similar, weren't they? And it was also around about when I started adding the leaves that I also started to decide how I wanted the flowers to look, and the ideas of using sort of paint pens were, starting to bounce around in my head at this point. So I decided to keep the foliage dark so that I could add details to the foliage with a white pen and then use black pen for the details of the flowers themselves. And this green is quite a deep colour, and it's called sap green. And even using it the way I'm using it at the moment, where I have watered it down a little bit, it's still pretty dark. But even though it is dark and I am also diluting it down, it's already a translucent paint. So you can see that first layer peeking through, and I kind of like that as well because it adds a unique texture to the leaves. I wasn't really careful about the leaves either, so that same sort of, I started without thinking about the composition when I did the flowers. Well, the same sort of thing happened with the leaves as well. I kind of started putting them on where I felt they should be, and it was only till later that I tried to balance them up a little bit. And they were as doodle painted as the flower circles were, really. So I kept filling in the spaces where I thought some foliage would be. And usually when I do my flower clusters, they tend to be, there's no space between the flowers themselves. If I do a cluster of flowers, they tend to be very bunched together. So this was slightly different for me. There was actually spaces in between the flowers where I could happily put the foliage. And it did feel a little bit strange painting foliage in between the flower circles, just because I'm not used to doing it like that. And it was even stranger when I then went to add the pen details as well, because then you've just sort of got a strangely shaped block of green, and which bit of it is a leaf? Are there several leaves there? Which direction is the leaf? All of these things started to kick in when I tried to doodle in those areas. And it might have helped if I'd had an actual bunch of flowers in front of me, which is actually something I've been meaning to do this whole month, get an actual bouquet and paint it, but I still haven't actually done it. And I have been using a lot of photos of flowers that I've taken, and they've been my reference for quite a few of the flowers that I've been doing recently. But they tend to be sort of more single flowers as well, ones that I spot when I'm out and about, and so less likely to be bunched and clustered flowers. So yeah, I definitely need to take some photo references of bunches of flowers, so great excuse to go and get some bunches of flowers. But yeah, anyway, this wasn't done to a reference at all, as it is entirely imaginary, as you can tell. I'm not really sure where these shapes came from either, and I have been doing a lot of line drawings of flowers recently, but I wanted these to be a little bit more abstract and a lot more doodly than those other penned flowers that I've been drawing. So I tried to change these up, and just as when I was adding the circle colour in that first place, I tried to keep the whole thing varied and not have similar ones next to each other or too close together. I mean, there are a couple of repeated shapes here, but I did try and make them slightly different so it just looked like, different flowers. Now don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to identify these flowers, as none of them, as you can tell, they're not meant to be real flowers. They are just a bit of doodling fun. But if you'd like to grab these as a download to colour in yourself, I've made them into a colouring page that you can download it from my Patreon page, and you don't have to be one of my patrons to grab it either. So I'll put a link in the description below to the post that this image is on, and it's just the line image of it, not the colouring, so you can literally just colour it in yourself. And it's just a lot easier to have it attached over on a Patreon post for you to just go and grab it there. Now it is totally for your own personal use, so please don't use it for anything commercial or pass it around, but you are totally more than welcome to direct people to the original post for them to download it themselves, or even to this video so they can watch it grow themselves and have fun with it. It's a long overdue thank you for being here watching and sharing with me too. So as I said, it's a little gratitude colouring page, or however else you'd like to use it too. So if you don't want to colour it, I'm sure there's loads of other ways of using it that I'm sure you can think of. So yeah, this piece did surprise me a bit. Have I been saying that a lot recently? I do feel like I've been saying that a lot with some of my projects recently. I suppose that's a good thing. Yeah, should we go with that? That's a good thing. And I really like the mix of the white and black pen details and how that works together, and the way it lifts the flower and the foliage and adds some contrast between them, as well as some detail to them. And I suppose it's another way of using white and black pen from that last week's floral where I also used them, but in that one I used them in the same flower. It was totally unintentional. I didn't plan it like that, it's just how it happened. So that was a mark making exercise that kind of turned into a stylised floral bouquet. Have fun colouring it in, and I will catch you again soon.